I was wondering, so this was the main question that was on my mind when I saw you tweet about this, about your new initiative of independent journalism. And so my question was immediately, why? Like, what's wrong with FT Alphaville? Why do we need you to be independent?
So, I mean, there's I've left the FT with what I would say good relations, because I'm still doing a few pieces for them every now and then as a freelancer. But I think this is a wider problem than just the FT. I think the nature of Alphaville. So Alphaville was, of its era. I think it was a time when it was in its peak heyday. Kind of, we didn't worry about copyright. We were blogging in a very reactionary way. The whole point of blogging was that it was rough, it was reactive. Sometimes we didn't get stuff right. There were typos. We edited each other's work, and the idea was to get stuff out there, and it was to differentiate from the core product, which is a totally different beast. Mm-hmm. It's journalism, what we were doing, but it was in a new framework, right? And I think what's happened is that as blogging's become more established, it's become professionalized. So in the early days, it was very easy to be forgiving about some of the kind of knee-jerk stuff we were doing, and I think it always added value, even when we made mistakes, because I think a lot of this time we were being reactionary in the style of markets when we're trying to learn and see new things, and we're kind of scouting the internet and doing that OSINT sort of stuff where we're like, hey, this really matters and blah, blah, blah. And just trying to pull information and aggregate things as much as give analysis and insight. But as things formalized, being a little scatty like that was less and less easy to get away with. There was a different expectation. And I think we, bureaucratic and commercial forces integrated Alphaville increasingly into the core of the FT, and the differentiation as an independent platform was lost to a certain degree. And that meant that people who weren't of the tribe and stumbled onto our content often didn't understand that it was a more not speculative, but like more, it wasn't the finished product of the FT to the same degree. The community was conversational. The whole point was that it was personality driven. It was, my writing. I'm not a great writer. I'm a really bad writer, actually. I'm dyslexic and I make typos, and I'm just, I'm more about the ideas and picking up good ideas and stories and speaking to people and pinpointing interesting sort of developments that maybe are being missed by the markets. That's what I do best. Mm-hmm. I don't operate as well in a more formal structure. That's just my own personal inclination, right? Mm-hmm. And people are very forgiving about my weaknesses, but I think it became increasingly difficult to do that sort of stuff in the new era in the FT, where everything is far more, it's always been professional, don't get me wrong, but like Alphaville became consumed by the core. It was a centralization sort of thing. And the appetite for the sort of risky stuff we used to do and the reactive stuff. And also very importantly, I think the cross-beat stuff, there just wasn't that appetite anymore. So
what's the cross-beat stuff, if I may interrupt?
So I think one of the in the early days of Alphaville, we were our own little segment. We were in the FT, but we were also kind of overlooked. We had a much higher reputation externally than we did internally. Internally, people were like, who are these like weird kids on the internet? This was like before anyone was on Twitter. Like people would be like, what's Twitter? It's like insignificant nonsense. And, we were all on Twitter from the very early days and working away. And we had no limits because we were our own thing, and people didn't really consider us a rival internally because we were so low on the spectrum of internal respect. We were right at the bottom, right? So people didn't see us as a not a threat is maybe the wrong word, as a challenger to their beats, right? Okay. So we could easily write about any topic. But as our profile went up, I think it became harder to just sort of intrude into other sectors and have a different opinion, because Alphaville's whole point is that we're kind of like an FT hedge. So if the FT is saying this, we would sometimes experiment with different opinions and work at things from a different perspective, because I think that's my personal philosophy as well, is that I think you have to look at things from all sorts of different perspectives. And as we matured, this became more problematic. And I totally understand why, like, beat reporters would be annoyed when Alphaville's coming in and saying, chasing the same contacts and then delivering a different conclusion to what they're saying, right?
Mm-hmm.
It can get annoying. So we're like an internal sort of personality deficiency within the FT, or an anti-FT, right?
Right.
And I think in that sense, after a while, we became increasingly constrained, and we looked at topics that were being missed by sector reporters. So often we ended up doing stuff in between the lines, whether it was fintech was a good example, because the financial reporters kind of thought it was a tech story. The tech reporters thought it was a finance story. So nobody was really doing it properly. And then Alphaville was there and we picked it all up. It was all very nice, low-hanging fruit for us. But those sort of cross-sector things become more complicated. And I definitely felt that there was a story. I thought my inclination around this time last year was that the story was evolving into a sort of global World War III thing. At the time, like this time last year. This was very taboo. You couldn't really say that sort of stuff.
So what's happening? What's happening today, basically, is what you mean.
Yeah,
then.
And I felt, so this is when I originally kind of realized that I don't think the sort of reporting I want to do is going to be easy to do in the structure of a very formal organization. So I think the polymath journalist is sort of about to really be, incredibly valued in the current environment, because you need someone who knows about finance. I'm not a military tactical person at all, but I am interested in it, and I follow it enough to have some insight, and I want to learn with my readers. And it's like with epidemiology, like when markets no one really knew about epidemiology, but markets now do. We had to learn as the story evolved.
Mm-hmm.
So I was kind of positioning myself for this new era that I think is coming. And I realized that I wasn't going to be able to compete with it would be very difficult and controversial and very cumbersome to kind of talk about Ukraine. I think internally, you can't cross politics and markets and sort of, very reactionary or I say reactionary in a sort of market reactionary way, coverage at the FT very easily, because everything is now very politicized and you have to be very careful. So your independence, but you can't also at the same time give quality coverage unless you're prepared to take a risk and take a few sort of, speculative punts every now and then. So